Hey everyone, welcome back to another Frosting Artist tutorial. One of the biggest questions I've been having from those of you that have already received my stencils is the type of consistency the frosting needs to be. So I have these Jack stencils that a lot of you have purchased, and I just wanted to walk through kind of what each type of frosting looks like, whether it is too runny or too thick, or if it's just right. I have this newer batch of frosting that I have just recently made yesterday that I used to frost these to this point, and then I'm going to use S4 on here to kind of show you guys. Well, I guess actually I think this one is one of the stencils that I changed for you guys. This one should be S2 for a lot of you, because I did change the wording on this, or I guess the titles. So either S4 or S2 will be this stencil. So as you can see, this is the one that has the stripes and his face. So it has a lot of finer details, which is why I chose this one for this tutorial. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a bunch just right off the bat of, this is the Frosting Artist Royal Icing recipe that I have provided in the support group, in the files, and also I send a copy in with your stencils when you purchase the stencils. So this is the recipe that I use. Obviously you guys may be using something completely different, but this frosting or icing, when you first make it, it's very thick. And what I like to do is I like to just kind of mix it to get a lot of those bubbles out. That helps with making your icing really smooth. So that's how you get the really crisp edges and the smooth surfaces, is by just pushing it against the side of your bowl, and that will push all the air bubbles out. It's right about there. So what I'm going to show you guys, using thicker frosting, you usually will have less issues than if you have too thin of frosting. So you probably won't see too big of a difference between this thicker frosting and the perfect consistency. The only difference is that it's easier to work with when it's a little bit thinner than this. But right off the bat, this is right out of the container. Fresh frosting. I haven't added any water to this at all. So what we're going to do, make sure that your stencils are lined up as best as you can. If they do shift a little bit while you are frosting, you should be able to shift them back as long as they don't shift too far. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little bit on the end of my spatula there. And then I'm going to just start on this side one. So what I like to do for these is hold clear out here on the edges, because if you hold really close, it will lift up your stencil and you will be more likely to get frosting underneath the edges, and then you just don't have as crisp of lines. It'll still turn out alright, but to get those crisp lines, you want to be as far away from the stencil as you can be, but still holding it firmly so it doesn't shift. So it takes a little bit of practice sometimes. But we'll just start with this really thick frosting, and I'll just kind of show you kind of what it does. Like I said, you'll still get really good results with thicker frosting. It's just easier to work with the frosting if it's a little bit thinner. So what you want to do, when I spread it, I'm just going to mention this again because I did mention it in my peach tutorial, but you want your spatulas to be at about a 45-degree angle. That way if you're at a 90-degree angle, you're really putting a lot of pressure and scraping with too much pressure, and that's what pushes underneath your stencil, and you really don't want that. So 45-degree angle, same one, you scrape. We're kind of aiming for a 45. And if you find that you have to go over it again to be able to get more of that frosting off, then feel free to do that. It's not going to mess up your stenciling at all. So we're just going to peel this off. And as you can see, it really didn't change too much from, not change too much, but it looks pretty close to what your perfect consistency will be. Here, let me peel this off. That way you can kind of see. And when you peel these off, you just kind of want to go around until you find a spot that this fits under, and then lay it flat. And literally you just slide it under, and it pulls it right off. So I want to show you up close. Let me see if I can get this. There you go. So as you can see right up here, there's two little spots that are supposed to be little black lines that kind of come at this angle and this angle. And as you can see, that frosting pushed underneath, so you don't get those black lines right there. You can kind of still see the impression, but not really. It doesn't show any black at all. That's because your frosting was too thick. And so when you're spreading your thicker frosting, it will push underneath those finer details. And this still looks amazing, and your customers would be totally happy with this. But if you want to get all of those fine details, you really need your frosting just a little bit thinner and not just straight from the mixer. And another thing, let me see if I can show this. If you can see, kind of right in here is a good example, and there's another one right over here where you have those little walls that pull up. It's kind of hard to get it perfect for you to see, but that happens more often, I find, with thicker frosting. So if your frosting is a little bit thinner, you don't get those lifted up spots as much. It's really hard to show here, but there are a few just along his hands and his stripes where you get those little walls that pull up. And when those dry, if you have to do another layer, those will cause your spatula to bump over them, making it so that you can't get a smooth layer. So a quick fix for that, if your frosting is a little bit thick, is once it dries a little bit, all you have to do is just kind of pat it down, like we've talked before in the peach video. If you get any walls, just let your frosting dry a bit and then pat it, and that should flatten out your walls quite a bit. So like I said, if you do end up with thicker frosting, you still get really good results. They just aren't as good as if your frosting was a little bit thinner. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to go run and wash off my spatula real quick because it's dried. And then then we'll move on to doing too thin of frosting. Alright, so I'm going to use the same frosting that we used before. And I'm going to use my little dropper. I'm just going to put a good amount of water in there. I want to make this too runny so I can show you guys kind of, when you guys are learning this and kind of mess around with this technique, I hope that this video will kind of help you troubleshoot kind of where your frosting is at and whether you need to make it thicker or runnier or if you've got it just right. I think I'll do a little bit more just to make sure that it is going to kind of show you what happens if you're too runny. Yeah, that's a lot better. So let me see if I can focus in on this. Let's see. You see how shiny that is? You kind of mix it up and then let it sit, and you start getting super shiny puddles of water. It's very shiny. It's a bit too runny. It might not. Here, I'm going to add a little bit more water. I really want to get the point across as to what it will look like when it's runny. So this is where you will get the worst results if your frosting is too runny, because your stencil can't contain the frosting when it's runny like it can if it's too thick. Because when it's too thick, it still contains it, it just doesn't give you as good of details and crisp lines, and then you get the little walls built up. When it's too runny, just throw this back on, make sure it's lined up real quick. I'll just move this guy out of the way so that he doesn't mess up my positioning. There we go. Okay. Oops. Okay, we'll go with that. Alright, you see how runny that is one more time. See if I can get that focus on there a little bit better. Super shiny, okay? And way runny. Alright, let's try it out. So, I'm going to move it over here so I don't get these dry chunks in there. That can be a whole nother video as to what those do to your frosting. Okay, I'm going to get a bit on my spatula. And once again, you're going to hold kind of far away from your design so that you're not bumping up your not your spatula, your stencil. So let's run this through. Super runny. So we'll peel this off. And then let me peel this off of here. And I can show you the results a little bit better. I'm sure you can already tell just from this distance the huge differences. Even the thickness of the frosting. This one's a really good white, and this one you can actually see the black through it because it's so runny. So let me show you this up close. You see how shiny it is? And this other one was not like that when we frosted it. It was not shiny pretty much at all, but this one is. So you do not want to see the water puddling on the surface, because even when this dries, it'll still have not necessarily a shiny look, but it's not going to be the crisp, dry surfaces that you're wanting to get. So if you look at the details, even just look at this hand here, comparing the two, you see how it completely just went underneath the stencil in all sorts of areas. Even over here, it's just, you lose a ton of the detail when it's too runny. And another problem with it being too runny that I discovered early on with this technique is if all of your layers are runny, they tend to not dry as quickly, and they tend to get a dry crust over the top, but they're still wet underneath. So when you put that next really runny layer on top, it softens that little crust, and then your colors bleed together. So you really want to avoid these. This is where you'll get your not the best results. Like I said, if it's a little bit thick, it's not that bad. You lose some detail, but still nice and crisp. But if it's runny, that's when you lose pretty much all of your nice and crisp details and lines. So now, and then also you don't get as true of colors, like how it gets kind of transparent. So now I'm going to show you how to fix it if your frosting is too runny. See how it's all like at the bottom of the bowl now because it all ran down? Your frosting should not do that when it sits. It should stay stuck to the side of your bowl. It should not be puddling in the bottom of your bowl. So all you have to do, if you find that you have added too much water, all you do is grab your big bucket of frosting and you just pull out more and add it in. It's really that simple. So you just add it in, and we do not want it to be as thick as it was right out of the container, like this first one. We want it kind of in between too runny and too thick. So that was probably just about the right amount. That feels perfect. Like I said before, kind of a toothpaste consistency, and you see how it's not sagging down and forming a puddle in the bottom like this other one did. It's staying stuck to the side. And if you look at it, there's a little bit of a shine, but it's not nearly. You look over here and there are puddles of water, very shiny. Look at this one, slight shine, but again, you're not getting these huge puddles forming on the surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, we're going to use this for our next one. So just move these guys out of the way over here. And I'll show you the results of the perfect consistency. Okay. Oh man. And of course, I mess it up because we're on camera here. That did not work on the hand right there. I must have had it just a little bit runny. Okay, I'm gonna go wash my stencil, and we're gonna make this slightly thicker and try again on these ones. As you can see, we did gain a few more details just from adding that little bit of extra frosting. So we'll add a little bit more to make it a little bit thicker, and that should get us the perfect results. Okay, so every time I'm just gonna mention this again, every time you clean your stencils, between uses I just rinse it underwater. I don't do anything fancy, but always make sure that your stencil is completely dry, because if you have a dot of water on there or anything, it is going to ruin your topper, because if this gets wet, it doesn't dry correctly. It'll dry shiny. It won't look, it'll be noticeable that there's water on there. So just be super careful and just double check your stencils before you throw it on your toppers. Okay, so we're gonna add a bit more. That's better. Okay, let's try this again. And really, it's just trial and error. I would suggest, as you guys practice, to kind of do what I'm doing here and start off with the frosting right out of your container and only adding a little bit of water, and then just kind of going from there, and just slowly add water until you get that perfect consistency, and just keep frost one layer at a time and until you get that perfect consistency. So just frost the rest of these. And I'm not pushing hard at all. Oops. When your stencil lifts up a little bit like that, as long as you don't keep smearing, it shouldn't cause any problems. If it does, just go in with a toothpick and you can scrape away whatever messed up. So we're just going to pull across this one, pull across that one, and we're not pushing hard when we scrape, because that's another thing. If you push really hard when you scrape, you're going to get underneath your lines again. So let's see how these ones turned out. That should be the correct frosting. There we go. Much better. Alright, I'll scrape off this end one for you guys to see up close. Kind of compare. So this one is with the perfect consistency. As you can see, we got the little black lines where his eyebrows are. And we got all the lines between his stripes and his fingers. That's the perfect consistency right there. And you see, when you try and shine the light on it, there is not a super shiny, glossy look to it. Looks very matte. So this is your perfect consistency. Here's your too thin and your too thick. So as you can see, the slight differences. This one looks totally fine, but when you compare the heads, this one obviously gives that little bit extra of detail. And a little bit crisper when it comes to the lines. This one doesn't have any walls that pulled up. And this one, as you can see, you lose all sorts of lines, all sorts of details. So there's your 3 different examples. And I would suggest that you guys just pick one of these simple designs that you've purchased and just keep trying the consistencies. And eventually you'll figure it out. And as you keep going and you keep frosting, it'll become easier and easier just to get that right consistency right off the bat. You won't have to worry about trying to get it slowly perfect every time. You'll get used to it. And eventually, you guys will be frosting perfect toppers every time. So, I hope this video helped. I hope that you guys will be able to get the correct consistency by using these tips. And if you have any questions at all, jump into the support group. Feel free to just make a post asking your questions. That way everybody else can learn from them too. But even if you prefer just private messaging me, that would be totally fine too. I'm always available to answer any questions, so I'll do my best to help you guys out wherever I can. So hopefully this helped. Thanks for watching.